Hi, my name is Jacob Little, and I'm a fellow at the Soderquist Center for Leadership and Ethics. I want to share with you a little bit about what leadership really looks like in the future. In Western society, we tend to think of history as linear, with specific events occurring at specific points in time. But in reality, history is very cyclical in nature, and there are four main parts to each cycle. The first part is a high, and from the high, we move to an awakening, and from an awakening, we move to an unraveling. And as things unravel, it turns into a crisis. Now, during each of these specific points in the cycle, a specific generation rises up in response to the times. During a high period, an artist generation tends to rise up because there is time and stability for people to be involved in artistic things. In an awakening, a prophet generation rises up. And during an unraveling, a nomad generation rises up. Now, during a crisis, a hero generation rises up that fights the big war to return the country or the society to a high. Each of these specific turnings or periods occur during the normal lifetime of a generation. So the whole cycle, it's called a seculum, takes about 80 to 100 years to cycle through. And so each of these generations are correlated with one of these periods. The cycle we're in now is called the millennial seculum. It starts with the American high just after World War II, when the GI generation returns from war and they return to positions of power, and they build America into this vast global empire. The second turning, the awakening, begins in the 60s with the consciousness revolution and the hippie movement and Woodstock and the Beatles and the rise of the New Age movement. And then from this awakening, we move into the unraveling period, which starts in 1984. And throughout this unraveling, you see crime start to rise, you see social unrest, and a lot of just drugs, prostitution, abortion. A lot of these things start to increase during this unraveling period. And then the unraveling period is beginning to end, and America is about to enter into a time of crisis. Now, right now, we're sometime between the third turning and the fourth turning. And then here's just a brief musical depiction of how times have changed over the last three turnings. We start with the Beatles in the awakening generation, and then we move to Michael Jackson for the nomad generation, and then for the crisis generation, the millennial generation, we have the Jonas Brothers. And if you'll notice the title, it says Lines, Vines, and Trying Times. So there's some acknowledgement that there's a bit of unraveling going on and there's a crisis coming. The authors of the book, An American Prophecy, say that 9/11 was not the beginning of America's fourth turning or crisis period because the right generations weren't in power yet. The current economic crisis may be just the beginning of the crisis period, but they say on a scale of 1 to 10, the crisis we're in right now only registers as about a 2. So there may be a lot of turmoil in the next 20 years to come. What does this have to do with leadership? Well, we know that the environment in which leaders lead determines what type of leadership skills are necessary, because leadership in a crisis looks very different from leadership during a high. Crisis leadership uses very specific skills and very specific competencies. So if we can forecast the future, we can determine what type of leaders we need to be on the cutting edge. So let's walk through some of the last hero generations of the last 500 years. In the mid-1400s, we have the Arthurian generation. This is the generation that basically explored the New World. It has people like Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, Amerigo Vespucci. These people conquered the New World and started to awaken Europe to the whole idea of another country that they could move to. After the Arthurian generation, about 80 years later, there's the Elizabethan generation. Now, this is the generation that faced massive decline in England's power, in their wealth, and they faced one of the most serious crises of their time, the invasion of the Spanish Armada. And this hero generation successfully defeated the Spanish Armada and brought England back into a place of global power. And they built these stately manors, they built bigger governmental institutions, wealth began to build. And so this is the great achievement of the Elizabethan generation. The next hero generation was the glorious generation. And in this generation, in the mid-1600s, was a lot of scientific advancement, a lot of colonialism, a lot of the wars that began because of colonialism. And that defined the glorious generation. The next hero generation is called the Republican generation. Now, this is the generation that fought, that was in positions of leadership during the American War of Independence. And after the war, these were the people who wrote the Declaration of Independence, wrote the Constitution, and filled most of the government during that initial period. It has people like George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and the Republican generation filled most of the governmental positions in early America. In the mid-1800s, we skip a hero generation, and we don't get to another hero generation until World War II, when the GI generation rose up to fight World War II and then returned to America to build it into the global powerhouse that it was until the 1980s. And then the current hero generation are the Millennials. This generation is the one that will be on ground zero during the crisis to come and will fight any war or conflict. Now, these Millennials are they're still growing up, they're in young adulthood right now, and they're often compared to Power Rangers because they have this mentality that they're ordinary kids, ordinary young adults that rise up to be the heroes, to save the day, to fight in choreographed groups together, and they take direction from a wise elder leader, like the GI generation of the boomers, much more than they take direction from their parents, for instance. So that's kind of an overview of the last hero generations from the last 500 years or so. So where are we today? Generation X, the nomads, or Generation 13, is just beginning to take on positions of leadership in their companies, in their organizations, in government. They're just entering their 40s, and Barack Obama, one of the most well-known Generation Xers, has just entered the presidency. Generation Y, the Millennials, are just entering their 20s, and they're going to be the ones at ground zero of the crisis to follow. If the nomads, if the Generation X's start a war, it'll be Generation Y, the Millennials, who are fighting it, and then who will return from the war to take positions of power. So who are Millennials? Millennials were raised as overprotected children. You didn't see babies on board sign until Millennials were born. A lot of Millennials have what's called helicopter parents, parents that call them in the morning to wake them up from class, call them after presentations to see how they did. They fill out job applications, they pay for college. You see a lot of Millennials returning home after graduating from college to live with their parents because parents never seem to quite leave their lives like they did with the nomads. Millennials are taught to be trophy kids. They believe that everyone is a winner and nobody is a loser and that everybody is special just like everybody else, and we believe it. We are the ultimate trophy generation and we love our trophies. Millennials are also very community-minded. They tend to do things together. And with the rise of technology, that has also led to a great increase in social networking. We're very much plugged into the social networking scene like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, blogging, Flickr. These are all ways we can share our lives with people, and not just in our communities, but in the global community as well. So we're very globally minded. Millennials have a sense of empowerment. They feel that they can change and influence structural inequality, and they're not afraid to stand on principle and fight for what they believe. One example of that is when Dawn Imus made a disparaging comment about a Rutgers University women's basketball player. And one of her friends, in response to this harassment, started a YouTube campaign against Dawn Imus and had him successfully ousted from his radio slot. And so Millennials are definitely not afraid to use their influence through social networking and social media to make social change. We feel very empowered to make social change. Millennials also are willing to run for political office at a very young age, unlike their Generation X predecessors. This is John Tyler Hammonds, who became the mayor of Muskogee, Oklahoma at the age of 19. And this is something you're going to see with Millennials. We're not afraid to run for office to foster social change at young ages. With nomads, you saw that they didn't really want to enter political office. They had more of a hands-off mentality. I won't mess with you if you don't mess with me. And so there are comparatively few nomads in political office than there are baby boomers, and there will be Millennials. So what does all this mean for leadership in the future? Well, during a time of change and crisis and constant flux, a leader is the one who can sustain his or her organization. A leader is the one who can gather a group of followers and keep them gathered around through a time of change and flux. So leadership in the future will equal sustainability. Leadership will also equal collaboration, because in an age where networking is so important, a leader is the one who can bring people together. In the future, leadership equals marketing. A person who can tell the best story and has the most followers is the leader. Seth Godin, one of the most widely read marketing bloggers on the globe, says, "I believe marketing is the most powerful force available to people who want to make change. It's no longer money, prestige, power, position. It's about marketing. It's about storytelling." Leadership equals tribalism, because in an era of globalization where everything is sort of becoming homogenized, minute distinctions are becoming more important than ever before. This is why you see a lot of ethnic conflicts starting in places like Bosnia or southern Russia, because ethnic distinctions are more important than ever. He who can gather a tribe around him based on a common idea, identity, or principle will be a leader in the future. All this can be rolled into one idea: leadership equals storytelling. But it's important to note that the link between storytelling and sustainability is authenticity, because a story can only be told for so long if it's not true. The stories that last are the ones that are based in truth and authenticity. Look at these two men, John McCain and Barack Obama. Which one had the better story? One had a story of being a POW, of being tortured in a Vietnamese prison, of being a Lion of the Senate for 40 years. And one had a short story as a community organizer, a state senator, and then finally a national senator for Illinois. Which one had the better story? Many would argue that John McCain's story was more compelling. But if you ask which one told the better story, it is clearly Barack Obama, because he appealed to people's desire for change, for hope, for a better future. Look at these two cars, the Porsche Cayenne and the VW Touareg. Which one tells the better story? Many would say the Porsche. It tells the story of a fast car, stylish, gets people's heads turning, versus Volkswagen, which was created by Hitler during World War II. It doesn't have a very compelling story behind it. Did you know that these cars are exactly the same? They have the exact same motor, the exact same interior features, but the Porsche can sell for thousands of dollars more because Porsche tells a more compelling story than Volkswagen does. Which of these, Walmart or Target, tells a better story? Target has Starbucks inside. Walmart has McDonald's. Which one has the better brand? What I'm getting at here is that story trumps truth. It doesn't matter if you have a good story. What matters is how you tell that story. Seth Godin says, anyone with the ability to tell a story has the ability to change things more dramatically than ever before in history. In a time of crisis, in a time of relativism, in a time where everyone is telling a different story and everyone wants you to follow them, a leader is the one who can provide clarity, who can provide simplicity, and who can provide direction going forward through a crisis and through any change and instability, and who can sustain that direction. We know that crisis is coming, and the world is getting ready for it. Look at these movies that have all come out recently. Collapse is about the collapse of institutions around the world. The Road is a post-apocalyptic story of father and son fighting for survival. 2012 is about the destruction of the world. And V is about the world being taken over by aliens. And all these movies have come out in November 2009. See, the world is getting ready for crisis. Look at some other movies that have come out recently. I Am Legend, An Inconvenient Truth, Armageddon. See, culture knows that the world is headed for a time of crisis and it's getting ready for it. Are you a future leader? Are you a millennial who's poised to become a leader in your organization? If so, get ready to lead in a time of change, chaos, turmoil, and flux. Learn things like adaptability, flexibility, problem solving, foresight, because these are going to be some of the most important characteristics of a leader. Learn how to bring people together around a common goal and sustain that goal with a long-term vision and a long-term mindset. Are you investing in the next generation of leaders? Well, then get them ready for a time of change. Get them ready for a time of chaos. Test them. Don't be afraid to throw things their way because they need to learn what leadership looks like in a time of crisis. And if you're developing leaders under you, it's partially your responsibility to make sure that they are ready. If you want to be a successful leader in the future, get ready to tell a compelling and an authentic story through a time of crisis and change.